After a work conference, my boss whispered in my ear, "No one has to know about last night." I stammered, "This was a mistake." He smiled, "Then why did you invite me to your room?" My coworker saw us and asked, "Are you two hiding something?" I knew my career and my relationship were about to collapse. I still don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe to confess to someone, even if it's just strangers on the internet. Maybe to get it out of my head before it destroys me completely. I wish I could say I don't know how it happened. That I just woke up one morning and my entire life had fallen apart. But that's not the truth. I know exactly how it happened. I let it happen. I've been with Nick for 8 years. We met in college, started dating right before graduation, moved in together after our first real jobs. He's the guy who knows everything about me, my favorite song, my weird childhood fears, how I shut down when I get too overwhelmed. He's safe, reliable. I love him. At least, I thought I did. I've also been at my company for 6 years. Worked my way up, took every opportunity. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to matter. That's why I was so excited when I got sent to an exclusive work conference in Chicago. It was my first real shot at networking with the big names. It felt like a step towards something bigger. My boss, Daniel, was going too. Daniel is the kind of man that makes people nervous in a way that's hard to explain. He's not mean. Not inappropriate. But there's something about him, the way he carries himself, the way he looks at people like he already knows what they're thinking. He makes people want his approval. I won't pretend I was any different. The first day of the conference was normal. Panels, networking, small talk. That night, there was a company-sponsored cocktail event in one of the hotel ballrooms. Fancy open bar, dim lighting, everyone pretending they weren't exhausted. I stuck with Amanda, my closest coworker. She's the only person I actually consider a friend at work. At one point, Daniel came over, handed me a glass of wine, and asked if I was enjoying the conference. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing serious, mostly about work. Then Amanda nudged me when he walked away. "You guys have weird chemistry," she said. I laughed. "He's my boss." She just shrugged. Later that night, when the event started winding down, Daniel caught my arm as I was leaving. "A few of us are getting drinks at the bar upstairs," he said. "You should come." I hesitated. I was tired. But I said yes. The group started off big. Other managers, people from different companies. But as the night went on, people left one by one. Eventually, it was just me and Daniel in the corner booth. The conversation shifted. It wasn't about work anymore. It was about life, regrets, things we wanted but never had the guts to go for. He told me he admired me. That I was sharp, ambitious. Then he leaned in slightly. "You surprise me," he said. I smiled, even though I could feel my pulse in my throat. "How so?" "You act like you have it all figured out. But I don't think you do." Something about the way he said it made my stomach flip. I should have left. That was my out. I should have stood up, made an excuse. Gone back to my room. But I didn't. I let him talk, let him get closer. And when his hand brushed my knee, I didn't move. The rest is a blur. I remember the elevator ride up. The way he stood too close behind me, his hand grazing my hip. I remember fumbling with my keycard. I remember the second the door shut, his hands were on me. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against my skin. I didn't. I woke up the next morning tangled in the hotel sheets, my head pounding, my stomach in knots. Daniel was already up, standing by the window, buttoning his shirt. He looked at me and smirked. "No one has to know about last night." My throat was dry. This was a mistake. He adjusted his tie, still smirking. "Then why did you invite me to your room?" My head snapped up. "I didn't, you did," he said smoothly. "Or at least, you didn't stop me." I felt like I was going to be sick. He wasn't wrong. I let it happen. Before I could say anything else, there was a knock at the door. My body went cold. Daniel raised an eyebrow, then grabbed his jacket and slipped into the bathroom. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed a robe, and cracked the door open. "Amanda." She didn't say anything at first. Just looked me over, taking in my messy hair, the way I was clutching the robe around me. Then her eyes flicked over my shoulder, toward the unmade bed, the suit jacket draped over the chair, the dress shoes on the floor. Her face went blank. "You okay?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "Yeah." Her expression didn't change. "Are you two hiding something?" My stomach twisted. "Amanda, she exhaled sharply. You don't have to explain. Just, be careful. Then she turned and walked away. I shut the door and pressed my back against it, my heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. Daniel stepped out of the bathroom, looking amused. Well, he said, that was close. I didn't look at him. You should go. He picked up his jacket, unfazed. I meant what I said, no one has to know. Then he left. The rest of the conference was torture. I avoided Daniel as much as I could, but I could feel his eyes on me across rooms. Every time our gazes met, his words echoed in my head. No one has to know. I barely remember the flight home. Nick was waiting for me at the airport, grinning, holding my favorite iced coffee in one hand. Hey, babe, he said, kissing my cheek. Missed you. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I'd throw up. I tried to act normal. Forced a smile. Let him hold my hand. But I couldn't meet his eyes. I couldn't kiss him without feeling Daniel's lips on mine. Couldn't let him touch me without my skin crawling. I thought about telling him. Every single day, I thought about it. But then I thought about what that would do to him. To us. So I buried it. I convinced myself it didn't matter, that it was a one-time thing. That it didn't mean anything. That I could move on. But then Daniel got promoted. And his new office was right across from mine. Now, every single day, I have to walk past him. Sit in meetings with him. Hear his voice. Amanda doesn't say anything, but she knows. I can see it in her face. And Nick still doesn't have a clue. I don't know how long I can keep this up. I kept telling myself it was over. That it was a one-time thing, a mistake I'd never make again. But secrets don't just sit still. They move. They shift. They grow heavier. At first, I thought I could handle it. I ignored the guilt, shoved it into the deepest part of my mind. But Daniel was always there. His office, right across from mine. His voice, smooth and knowing in meetings. The way he'd glance at me when no one else was looking, just a flicker of amusement in his eyes, like he knew something no one else did. I tried to be normal at home. I kissed Nick. I laughed at his jokes. I let him hold me at night, even when my skin burned with the weight of my own betrayal. But something had shifted, and no matter how hard I pretended, he started to notice. You've been weird lately, he said one night, stretching out on the couch. I forced a laugh. Work's just been crazy. He nodded but didn't look convinced. It's Daniel, isn't it? My blood went cold. What? He frowned. You're always talking about how stressful things are with him now. And I saw the way you tensed up when I mentioned his name. I stared at him, my pulse thudding in my ears. If I confessed right then, if I just let it all spill out, would he leave? Would he hate me? I swallowed hard. Yeah, I said, forcing my voice to stay even. He's just, a lot. That promotion made him worse. Nick sighed, rubbing his forehead. I hate that guy. I nearly choked on my own breath. He's just one of those smug corporate assholes, Nick went on. Thinks he's better than everyone. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and excused myself to the kitchen, gripping the counter so hard my knuckles went white. I could feel my life splitting into two versions of itself, one where I was still the person Nick thought I was, and one where I had already destroyed everything. And then things got worse. It happened 2 weeks later. An all-hands meeting had just ended, and I was heading back to my office when I heard Amanda's voice behind me. Hey. We need to talk. I turned, my stomach twisting into knots. About what? Her face was unreadable. You know what? I glanced around, paranoid. Not here. We took the stairs up to the rooftop lounge, one of the only places in the office where people rarely went. As soon as the door shut behind us, Amanda turned to face me, arms crossed. I can't keep pretending I don't know, she said. I swallowed. Amanda, she held up a hand. I'm not judging you. I swear. But you need to figure this out before it explodes. I looked down at my shoes. It was a mistake. I don't care what it was. I care about what it is now. I finally looked at her. What does that mean? She hesitated. You really don't see it, do you? I stared at her, waiting. She sighed. Daniel's not done with you. I shook my head. It's over. Amanda's jaw tightened. Then why does he look at you like he's waiting? I didn't have an answer. It started small. An email from Daniel, short and casual. Close the door before our next meeting. I froze. I looked across the office. He was at his desk, fingers tapping lazily on his keyboard, eyes on his screen. Like he hadn't just sent something that made my stomach drop. I did as he asked. He walked in a few minutes later, shutting the door behind him. "Relax," he said, taking a seat. "This is just a check-in." I forced a nod. Then he leaned back, studying me. "You're tense." I bit the inside of my cheek. "I'm fine." He smiled. "Are you?" I hated the way he was looking at me, like he was peeling back my layers, getting to the part of me that no one else could see. "Nick doesn't suspect anything, does he?" I felt the blood drain from my face. Daniel's smile didn't waver. "Relax. I'm just making sure we're on the same page." "We are," I said quickly. "This is done." He tilted his head. "If you say so." Then he stood, adjusting his sleeves like this was just another ordinary meeting. "You know," he said, hand on the doorknob, "sometimes things don't stay buried as easily as we'd like." Then he was gone. I sat frozen at my desk, his words looping in my head. The next morning, Amanda stormed into my office. I barely had time to react before she shut the door and spun toward me. "You need to listen to me." I blinked. "What?" She sat down, leaning forward. "I heard something." I swallowed hard. "From who?" She hesitated. "HR." My stomach dropped. She lowered her voice. "Daniel's been talking about you." A chill crawled up my spine. "Talking how?" Amanda exhaled. "I don't know exactly. But I overheard something about an inappropriate work relationship." My breath hitched. "No. No, he wouldn't. You need to get ahead of this," Amanda cut in. "Now." I felt like I couldn't breathe. My brain was racing, calculating every possible way this could go. If Daniel was talking to people, planting a narrative, what was his plan? Was he trying to protect himself? Or was he setting me up to take the fall? And then, the worst thought hit me. What if he was trying to control me? What if this was his way of saying, "You belong to me now"? I felt like the walls were closing in. Amanda reached across the desk, gripping my hand. "What are you gonna do?" I didn't have an answer. I just knew one thing, Daniel wasn't done with me. And if I didn't act fast, I was going to lose everything. I spent the rest of the day feeling like I was moving through a fog. I barely heard anything in meetings. I barely spoke to anyone. Every time I looked at my email, I half expected to see a message from HR. Amanda's warning wouldn't leave my head. If Daniel was talking about me, it wasn't an accident. He never did anything without a reason. By the time I got home, my nerves were fried. Nick was in the kitchen making pasta, humming to himself. It was a painfully normal scene. "Hey, babe," he said, smiling. "Rough day?" I forced a smile. "Yeah. Just a lot of work." He nodded and kept cooking, completely unaware that my entire life was dangling over the edge of a cliff. I couldn't eat. I picked at my food, barely tasting it. Nick noticed. "You sure you're okay?" I nodded. "Just tired." He studied me for a second, like he didn't quite believe me. But he let it go. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, my mind running in circles. What was Daniel's plan? Was he trying to get ahead of something? Was he setting me up for a fall? And most terrifying of all, what would Nick do if he found out? The next morning, I walked into the office and immediately knew something was wrong. People were looking at me. Whispering. My stomach turned. Amanda rushed to my office and shut the door behind her. She looked pale. "What the hell is going on?" I asked. She hesitated. "I don't know how to tell you this." I gripped the edge of my desk. "Tell me." She pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, and turned the screen toward me. It was an email. A company-wide email. Subject: Workplace conduct concerns effective immediately. The company will be conducting an internal review regarding professional workplace relationships and potential conflicts of interest. Employees will be contacted if needed. My heart nearly stopped. "This isn't about me," I whispered. Amanda didn't say anything. But I knew. I knew. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I grabbed my own phone with shaking hands and checked my email. There it was. A message from HR. "We'd like to schedule a meeting regarding workplace conduct and professional boundaries. Please confirm your availability." I dropped my phone like it had burned me. "This is Daniel," I choked out. Amanda nodded. He's covering his ass. He knows something might come out, so he's getting ahead of it. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to think. If Daniel was covering his ass, what was he saying about me? Before I could spiral any further, there was a knock at my office door. I looked up. Daniel. Amanda tensed but stepped aside as he walked in like he owned the place. He didn't even look at her. Just me. Give us a minute, he said. Amanda shot me a warning look but slipped out. The second the door shut, Daniel sat down across from me, completely relaxed. You got the email? He asked. I couldn't speak. He sighed, like this was all just mildly inconvenient for him. You look nervous. I swallowed. Did you do this? His expression didn't change. Do what? I clenched my fists. Don't play dumb, Daniel. You started this review. You told HR something. He smiled slightly. I may have mentioned workplace relationships in passing. It's important to keep the company's reputation clean. I stared at him. Are you setting me up? He tilted his head, amused. Why would I do that? I could barely hold back the rage boiling under my skin. Because you're a manipulative piece of shit who needs control. He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. Come on. Do you really think they'd fire me over this? I'm untouchable. I swallowed hard. But I'm not. He didn't deny it. You should be careful what you say in that meeting, he said, standing up. Would be a shame if things got twisted. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something at him. But instead, I sat there, frozen, as he walked out of my office. And I realized something. This wasn't just about keeping things quiet anymore. This was a game. And Daniel was making sure I'd lose. That night, I walked into the apartment feeling like I was about to collapse. I wanted to tell Nick everything. I wanted to beg him to help me. But before I could even take off my coat, he turned to me, his face unreadable. Who's Daniel? He asked. My blood ran cold. I forced a laugh. You know who Daniel is. He shook his head. No. I mean, why the hell is he sending you messages at midnight? My entire body locked up. What are you talking about? Nick pulled out his phone and tossed it onto the counter. You left your laptop open. Your texts were right there. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Nick's jaw clenched. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me there's nothing going on. I opened my mouth. No words came out. And that was all the answer he needed. Nick stood there, his phone on the counter, waiting for me to say something. To lie. To deny. To beg. But I couldn't. The words sat in my throat like broken glass, sharp and cutting. My hands were cold, my body frozen in place. Say something, he demanded, his voice quieter now. Quieter was worse. It meant he wasn't just angry, he was hurt. I opened my mouth, but all that came out was, I'm sorry. Nick let out a breath, like he had been punched in the gut. He nodded slowly, stepping back. So it's true. Tears stung my eyes. Nick, he shook his head. I don't want to hear it. The silence between us was unbearable. The walls of our apartment felt smaller, closing in. He grabbed his keys off the counter. Where are you going? I choked out. Anywhere but here, he said. And then he was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door. I should have run after him. Should have done something. But I didn't. Because what could I possibly say? I had wrecked everything. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my trance. Daniel. I nearly threw my phone across the room. Instead, I answered. What do you want? His voice was smooth as ever. Rough night? Go to hell, Daniel. He chuckled. That's not very nice. Especially since I just heard some very interesting news from HR. My breath caught. What? You're being called in for a formal discussion tomorrow. And I have to say, I'm concerned. You wouldn't be planning to say anything stupid, would you? I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Are you threatening me? Daniel sighed. Threat is such an ugly word. I'm simply reminding you that if things get messy, well, we both have a lot to lose. My stomach twisted. You did this. He didn't even deny it. You should really get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day. Then he hung up. I stared at my phone, my pulse pounding in my ears. Daniel had planned this from the start. He had made sure that if anything came out, I'd be the one who took the fall. He was untouchable. But maybe I wasn't as powerless as he thought. The next day, I walked into the HR office, my hands shaking. Amanda was already there, her face tight with worry. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. But I did. The head of HR, Karen, motioned for me to sit. Daniel was already there, looking as composed as ever. "So," Karen began, "there have been some concerns raised about inappropriate relationships in the workplace." Daniel leaned forward, voice steady. "I want to be clear that my priority has always been professionalism. Unfortunately, sometimes lines get blurred, and misunderstandings happen." I clenched my fists. He was framing the narrative. If I stayed quiet, I'd be the one painted as the problem, the woman who threw herself at her boss, who made him uncomfortable. No. Not this time. I took a breath. "I'd like to be completely honest about what happened." Daniel's eyes flicked to mine, sharp with warning. I ignored him. I told them everything. The conference. The night at the bar. The way he manipulated the situation. How he pressured me to keep quiet, how he tried to control the narrative. When I finished, the room was dead silent. Karen looked at Daniel, then back at me. "That's serious." Daniel let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "This is a very dramatic retelling." Karen turned to him. "So you're denying it?" He spread his hands. "I think it's clear that emotions were involved. But I'm not going to sit here and argue over someone's memory of events." I opened my mouth, but Karen held up a hand. "We will be investigating this fully. Until then, Daniel, you are suspended pending review." I exhaled so sharply I nearly collapsed. Daniel's smirk faltered. Karen turned to me. "We'll also be speaking to other employees. I assume you'd be willing to provide any further details if needed?" I nodded. "Yes. Of course." Daniel stood slowly, his face unreadable. But as he passed me, he leaned in slightly and muttered, "This isn't over." For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I left the meeting in a daze. Amanda grabbed my arm. "Holy shit," she whispered. I swallowed. Did I just ruin my career? Amanda shook her head. "No. You just saved yourself." Nick wasn't home when I got back. I didn't blame him. I didn't even know what I'd say if he was. So I sat on the couch, staring at the engagement ring on my finger. I had spent so long trying to hold on to a life that didn't exist anymore. Trying to pretend I was still the same person. But I wasn't. I had burned everything down. And now, I had to figure out if I could live with the ashes. The investigation lasted weeks. More people came forward. I wasn't the first woman Daniel had done this to. I wasn't even the second. He was fired. But that didn't undo what happened. It didn't fix Nick and me. One night, I came home to find his suitcase by the door. He stood there, his face tired, his eyes dull. "I can't do this." Tears burned my eyes. "Nick, please," he shook his head. "I love you. But I don't think I can ever trust you again." I didn't beg. I didn't make excuses. I just nodded. And then, I watched the only person who ever really knew me walk out the door. I don't know what happens next. Maybe I start over. Maybe I carry this guilt forever. All I know is, there are some mistakes you don't come back from. And this was mine.